Welcome to the Misophonia Podcast. Welcome to Season 4, the first episode of a new batch of interviews being recorded this month. My name's Adil Ahmad, and I have Misophonia. On this episode, I'm talking to Keara, a senior at Macalester College, right around the corner from my house in Minnesota. It's amazing how many people around us have this condition. As you may remember, I kicked off Season 2 with another local misophone, my next-door neighbor, in fact. Keara tells us about her issues growing up with miso and being triggered at home, as well as, eventually, by her grandparents she loves. The therapists who thought exposure therapy would be a good idea, and also now in college, how it's been living with roommates, navigating through her program while trying to keep her miso at bay. Interviews are happening daily now for Season 4, and I can tell you now, there are some incredible ones. Really proud of everyone coming on the show and sharing their stories. Remember, they aren't doing this for me. They're doing this to try to help sufferers like you by showing the world that we're not alone, that this is real, and we're all trying to find ways to cope. A reminder, you can always reach out by sending me a message through the website, misophoniapodcast.com, or email hello@misophoniapodcast.com, or hit me up on Instagram or Facebook at Misophonia Podcast. Please hit the 5 stars if you're enjoying the shows on Apple Podcasts, I should say. All right, now, here's my conversation with Keara. Keara, welcome to the podcast. Good to have you here.
Thank you. It's great to be here.
So, as you know, and this is should be the first episode of the season, you want to tell me, I guess, whereabouts you're located?
Yeah, I'm in St. Paul right now, in Minnesota, so pretty
Excellent,
local.
yeah. So you're probably like a few blocks from me because I'm in St. Paul as well.
Oh, that's right. Yeah.
And actually, I think it was last season or season before, I actually interviewed my next door neighbor who coincidentally has misophonia.
Oh, that's fun. Had you known each other before that, or did you?
Not at all. I bought the house. Wow. And total coincidence.
That's really fun. That's such a great way to meet somebody.
Yeah, I know. So yeah, maybe you want to tell me, I guess, what you're doing? Are you student at Macalester? I think we mentioned earlier. Okay.
Yeah,
cool.
I'm in my senior year, so hopefully going to be graduating in about 2 months, and figuring out how to be an actual adult. That's gonna be exciting.
Yeah, and do you mind if I ask like what you're studying?
Yeah, I'm studying computer science. So hopefully when I graduate, I'm going to be working with Medtronic, working on some machine learning algorithms for medical devices. So that would be pretty exciting. That's something that I'm pretty interested in, like artificial intelligence and robotics and that kind of. I'm a big nerd, so. Yeah,
as am I. As you know, many of us. I've mentioned the podcast before that I've heard from Dr. Johnson, big audiologist in the space, that this it's a lot of our clients are engineers, and so there's something about that, and I'm sure we'll get into, as we get into some of your story, I'm sure there'll be a lot of things that we've heard before and might resonate with people. But I guess maybe you just want to maybe talk about how's it been? So you're a senior. How's college life been then with miso at Macalester?
Mostly it's been fine, especially because only the first 2 years I was on the campus meal plan. So the main thing that bothers me is like eating sounds. So usually but there was one person who is a lovely human being, but who just so very noisy eater. Luckily, I never ate lunch with that person, but sometimes they would be like at the table across from me. I would be like, okay, I just need to like go into my calm inner space and try to enjoy my lunch.
And this is a friend of yours?
Oh, actually, I don't know their name. I just have this vivid memory of them eating their food. Right. But so.
I'm sure you've called them names in your head, but
I try not to, but yeah, I have to admit, probably I have.
Oh yeah.
We all do it. We all done that. Most of my friends, luckily, are pretty quiet eaters, or at least I don't eat with them often enough to I've noticed that I start noticing individual people's sounds more and more the more I get to know them. So when I first meet someone, I'll be like, "Oh, this is so pleasant to be able to be around you. You don't make any sounds at all." And then, if I've known them for 3 years, then I'll be like, "I've heard that one little sound you make so many times," and then it like gets to me somehow.
Right. The pattern kind of imprints
Right.
in
Yeah,
your
exactly.
relationship with them.
Yeah.
Do your friends know that you have miso, or is it something that you just kind of keep to yourself?
Usually I keep it to myself. My roommates know because, especially since COVID, we've all been stuck in the same house for like a year together, and we have a very small house. Sometimes I can like hear eating sounds through the walls because we have very thin walls. So
Mm.
I did, that's something I tell my roommates when we move in, just, when everyone sits down to have that sort of roommate discussion of just in general, like what are everyone's needs and how are we going to work together as a household. That's
And
something I always
you
try to
didn't,
bring up.
right? And you didn't pick your roommates before, right? It's kind of random.
In my first year, when I first came to college, it was random, but then luckily after that, I've been able to pick who I room with. Although that wasn't really a consideration for me, like the misophonia thing in terms of my roommate selection. I've just because I think it's pretty easy to manage if we just have an understanding about, I'll try and put on headphones, or I'll try and, be in another room while people are eating a meal, or things like that. So
Right. So, I mean, the key thing is if as long as you have a place to go to, like your own room,
yeah, yeah, and
and then the
that works
headphones.
almost all the time. We have uh, two people in singles, and then me and my roommate are in a double. And usually that's fine because she's not eating in the room. One or two times she has been like eating chips late at night, and I'm trying to sleep, and I had to like, I'm so sorry, but like I
Oh,
really
so
need you
you,
to not be eating
yeah,
those chips in here right now
gotcha. Yeah.
because
So
where else am
you
I
do
gonna go
share a
sleep?
room.
So
Yeah,
yeah,
exactly. Okay. And okay, so yeah, she'll sometimes eat later, but so did you tell her that you have miso, or is it more just when the problem arises, you kind of tell her what to
yeah.
do?
I I think I hadn't. We've been friends since our first year. We started living together in our sophomore year, and I don't think I told her until this year, actually, which
Mm,
probably I should have before. I think I've usually not had to mention it, but I did have to have like sit down and have a conversation this year because again because of COVID, it just has made it so much more of kind of like a consideration.
yeah.
Um, and I don't know if I like used the official word like misophonia, but I definitely, I explained like this is something that like causes me emotional distress when you do that, and it's not like not a personal attack if I'm asking you to stop, but like that's just something I need from you. So that that conversation went just fine, luckily. But I think it was helpful to actually have that um, laid out for me to like clearly explain what my experience is, because for a lot of people, and like this is something that was really true when I was sort of learning that I had this with my family as a kid, that like I didn't really understand, like this isn't something that other people already know about and other people already experience. So then I didn't know at first that I would need to like explain the fact that like this isn't just mildly annoying, it's like distressing. you
Right.
know um and that was something that I think was helpful for her to understand, that once I said that, then she was like, oh, okay, now I understand why you've been like giving me sideways glances
Yeah.
sometimes.
The glare. Yeah.
Yeah, that it's not like oh, I'm angry at you, but it's just like I'm experiencing an emotion right now because of that trigger. So,
Yeah, no, that's a great approach is to kind of like explain it that way as opposed to coming at it as an attack on you're doing something wrong. It's more like
right,
I have a problem
right.
approaching it. Is there is there a reason why you maybe you're tentative like mentioning it to people? Like had you had had you mentioned it to others in the past? Maybe you had a bad reaction
Oh,
or
yeah. I'm trying
yeah.
to think.
I
Have
mean,
I
everyone
had
has
it?
their own experience with whether they tell her or not. I'm just curious if
Yeah. I guess I was a little hesitant just because it's like kind of most people don't know what the heck I'm talking about
right.
when I try and say that, and then I get into a whole conversation and blah blah. I also have congenital anosmia, which is probably unrelated, but it's from birth. I haven't had a sense of smell because I'm missing my olfactory bulb in my brain. That's another fun fact about me.
Mm.
That's another thing where I like don't tend to tell people unless it immediately comes up. Like someone hands me a candle and they're like, smell this. And I'm like, sometimes I just smell it and I'm like, oh, it's nice. Because I don't feel
Right.
like getting into it. I feel like it's kind of that. It's like, I could sit down and explain this to you and like you will ask me the same three questions everyone asks me or whatever.
Right. It's
But
kind of
like
exhausting, right?
a
Sometimes
little bit.
these kinds of conditions, it's like you've gotten used to it. And just having to, yeah, haven't thought of sometimes having to bring it up after it's like it takes so much energy just to kind of get over the trigger that you don't want to have to then,
Right.
have make a big deal about it.
Yeah, definitely. No, and that's something I have definitely noticed that once I'm already feeling upset if there's a noise going on, that's the wrong time to like have that in-depth conversation.
Absolutely
Usually.
right. Yeah, absolutely.
So yeah, I think if I have like a long term enough relationship with someone where that conversation probably needs to happen, then I usually try and like find a time that's just sort of like we're just hanging out and I can bring it up. And then I try and find ways to like I when I was in high school, I went to a therapist for a while for like social anxiety, and we also talked about misophonia. And so she had some great strategies for like, like focusing on taking some deep breaths and like, almost kind of meditative practices, which is like I can sort of control those reactions from the sounds if I do that, but I have to totally concentrate on it completely. So it's just like not worth it to me. Like I remember she had my parents come in and bring like food and eat it loudly in front of me. And I was like, no, this is not going
Oh,
well for me.
yeah, that's
And
full on
then
exposure therapy. That's
exactly, I was like, I understand what you're trying to do here, but I like, gonna, this is not it, like this is not working out. Um, just because like I feel like it's needs to be kind of a uh, everyone working together to like I don't think it should be just on me
right.
to resolve the situation. Like I don't think it should be just on other people to be completely silent, but I also think it's reasonable for like me to have feelings and like express them
Yeah.
yeah, but that was
No,
an
it's
interesting
great.
experience.
Yeah, had she heard of it before, or is it something that you told her and then she Google searched it
Yeah.
and unfortunately hit upon exposure therapy as
I should have asked her because I don't actually know. I don't remember whether it was like, oh, I've had other people who had this and this was helpful for them or not. I maybe you're right that because it was something I was pretty hesitant when she mentioned it. I was like, I don't know about that.
and you're paying for that. I mean, you basically paid for
Yeah.
exposure. You paid for your parents to be eaten in front of you. But so did she have other eventually come around having other useful tips? Like sounds like that
Oh,
deep breaths,
it was
meditation. Yeah.
yeah, it was really useful advice. I mean, especially even though that didn't end up being like my long term, you know, complete strategy for managing having misophonia. Like it was helpful for those moments where like I haven't explained it to someone and I need to just like get through the next 5 minutes where we're eating lunch together and like not be rude. And then I can explain it later. So like that was actually helpful. It's just that I guess it was, in a sense, like it was also helpful for me to understand, like, okay, this is actually like a real valid thing that I'm feeling. Like I'm not just blowing it up in my mind. Like this is actually something that's very difficult for me to control myself. Like I actually, when I was talking with my roommate about this, it became a little bit of a source of tension. But we worked it out because we have a very strong friendship. But like that was actually something that was helpful for me to be able to tell her like that I had that experience so she could kind of understand like, oh, this is like a thing. It's not just like a little
Right. It's not like
you know,
right. It's not like this little annoyance of
not a
like a
little
pet. It's not a
annoyance,
pet
right?
peeve. Yeah. Yeah.
Right. Yeah.
So you
Exactly.
said so it did become a source of tension when you start to mention it to her, or the glaring and all that stuff was trying to be the
Yeah,
tension.
I'm not sure exactly where the tension came from, but there definitely was, and I think it's partially just like living in the same space together for so long during
Yeah.
a pandemic when there's all kinds of other stressors. Like, um, I think that sort of all contributed to where it's like if I'm bringing up something like, could you please not be eating that loudly right now? And if she didn't understand already exactly why I was saying that, then like that kind of makes sense why that could be a little bit like, why are you suddenly telling me this? Like, why are you suddenly asking me to do something that, from my perspective, is totally reasonable for me to be doing in my own house? Like, I think
Right.
that was her first reaction was like, I live here too. And I was like, that's super valid and you're correct. But like, I also live here too. So like, we need to find a way to
Yeah.
um, both make that work. And we did, luckily. But um,
So, and curious, like, yeah, well, how did you get over that little, was it just kind of time and just explaining it more?
yeah, I think so.
Yeah.
And I think definitely like kind of allowing the conversation to be a little bit tense and then just like come back to it later.
Mm.
Um, because like I do understand like why that is frustrating for people when this is something that I need from them because like uh, what I found is like people genuinely don't know when they're making sounds when they're eating. And even if they do notice, it's like basically like the way that we eat is so subconscious. It's like basically impossible to um, consciously change that sometimes. So like I totally understand where that frustration is coming um, from the other end. Um, I kind of lost track of what I was talking about, but
No, no, this is good. We were kind of talking about how you and your roommate got over that tension, and it was probably just time and explaining a bit more and
right,
and allowing that tension to happen, and then yeah, you mentioned the very what we all experience is like it's the other person usually they have no idea that they're causing these sounds, which is
right,
such the opposite. I mean, it's hard for them to understand what we have, but it's hard, it's hard for us to understand not being aware of sounds.
yes,
And so it sounds like you guys kind of came, met in the middle at some point and are
right,
able to move
yeah,
on.
yeah. I
Um,
think that's the important thing is definitely like meeting in the middle and under like having empathy to be able to understand the other person's experience because it's obviously like very different for both people.
yeah. And so another, I mean, you mentioned stress, and then you probably both are experiencing that. And as we know, stress is a huge factor in many things, especially misophonia. So how's that been? You're in a pretty intense program, computer science at Macalester. Has that, pulled you, one way or the other with misophonia?
Um, I think it's kind of just
Or you kind of have
uh,
been able to manage it at this point, like using whatever strategies that you have?
yeah, for the most part. I would say it's something that the misophonia, the stress from that is like usually pretty temporary. Like once I kind of go sit somewhere quiet for 10 minutes, then I like feel better again. And I think
Mm-hmm.
it's on certain days when I've just been having a really bad week or something, it'll kind of like ruin my mood for a while. But usually it's pretty compartmentalized, I guess, which is good.
Yeah. So yeah. Well, so what are you mentioned headphones. What are some of your tricks of the trade
Mm.
that you have?
Let me think. That yeah, definitely listening to some music with
And is
the
it generally
headphones in.
music? Like it's not like anything like white noise pumped in or brown
Yeah,
noise or anything
I've
like that.
tried white noise, but
I
I
mean, that gets kind
found
of boring after a
it's a
while.
little boring.
Yeah.
And it's also like I had to turn it up so high, it was like hurting my ears. And then because white noise is often kind of a constant sound, I could still hear the other sounds around me coming through because they were,
Yeah.
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 Um,
That's why I prefer music as well, at least because your
yeah.
brain, I think, maybe has something to think about.
Yeah,
It's like,
yeah. Yeah, definitely. Um, Plus, it's fun to listen to music.
right.
So definitely, yeah, definitely music. Like going into a different space. Sometimes even
Hmm.
if I can just be somewhere where I'm alone. So even if I'm hearing the sound, I can just be like grr or like have an angry expression and like not bothering anybody.
Right.
Sometimes
Have
I
a
just kind
room
of
that
yeah.
has a bunch of holes in the wall now because you've
Exactly.
punched it. Yeah.
Yeah. And that's something that can be good. I think this was actually something that I remember I had originally talked about with the therapist when I was in high school. For anxiety as well, this is a good thing. But just like when you're having some kind of negative emotion, like that's not in itself going to hurt you. Like it's okay to be having a negative emotion, and like that's the worst thing that's going to happen in that moment. And sometimes just like remembering that, just remembering that is helpful for managing it in the moment, because especially if I know like we're going to be done eating in 10 minutes, so I'll just kind of like feel a
Absolutely.
little upset.
Yeah.
um,
No, we've mentioned that. Yeah. So that's a great approach. Um, what about what about during like exams and because you can't
oh
obviously well, I know I've talked to some people who have been able to kind of do things in a somehow being able to get into a different room, but curious how that's been for you because generally it's not the case, and you don't have access to headphones or and you're
yeah.
just kind of like at the whim of whoever's around you.
Yes, no, I totally feel that way, just at other people's whim. And also because you're not allowed to like talk to each other during an exam, so you don't even have that option of like being
Telling people to
polite,
shut
like,
the
oh
F
my
up. Yeah.
gosh, could you, yeah. Or those are two very opposite strategies. But
Right.
you're thinking
Right.
in your head, shut the F up, and you're
Right.
saying out
Right.
loud, excuse me.
Exactly.
um, yeah, I think usually I've been very lucky
Hmm.
because when you're taking an exam, you're also not eating. So sometimes people will be like making weird little
Oh
sounds
yeah.
with their nasal passages or something, or clearing their throat. That could be very bothersome. I've definitely
Right.
had experiences around like, like, okay, this is just what's happening right now.
Some people do that, yeah, at the beginning of every question, or they turn the page and then they have to like
Oh, like
exhale
they
or
lick their
something.
finger, or they,
Yeah, exactly.
yeah.
Right, right, right. But that's
And
great that if you've
sometimes,
been pretty lucky to get
yeah, I
through
have been.
those.
And sometimes I can. There have been a couple times where I've been in class, and even not during the exam, even just like during the lecture, I've just like literally I just like plug my ears. I don't even
Mm-hmm.
try it. Sometimes I get to a point where I'm not even trying to be subtle about it. I'll just like, because I can still hear the professor talking,
Right.
but I can't hear other small sounds. And like if I'm kind of like um, you know moving my fingers a little bit or something, like making a little rustling sound, then that sort of acts like as if it was a white noise.
Ah,
So
and this
I
is if
found
you
that
don't
that
have
helps.
headphones on you, right? During
Yeah.
yeah, yeah. And do you have a and we'll get into visual triggers as well, but do you prefer to sit in the front or the back of the
Oh,
the room or whatever?
I haven't really noticed any preference like around sounds with that, but I definitely, okay, there was a right before we went on lockdown, when I had actual in-person classes. I was taking a psychology class, and one of my close friends was also in the class, and we were like the two juniors in the class with mostly first years. So we'd like to sit together, but there was the preceptor, actually was the preceptor of the course, who would sit in this one place in the corner in the front of the room, and just constantly like playing with their mouth somehow. Just like I don't even. I would sometimes hear a sound and try and like look over and like just to
Yeah.
understand what was this person even doing with their mouth to like produce that sound. Like it was kind of impressive actually, but really bothersome for me. And unfortunately, my I was always late. I was always running late, and my friend was always early. So they would go
Hmm.
and sit right next to the preceptor, and I'd be like, oh, I don't know why I didn't just like after class one day be like, can we sit somewhere else in the classroom?
Yeah.
Other than that, so that probably would have been a good solution. But I ended up just when I would come in late, I would just go sit in the other corner, um, and then I wouldn't get to sit next to my friend, which was sad. But that was partially my fault for like being so late all the time.
It would be interesting if since it was psychology, if you kind of raised your hand and offered like, oh, I heard
Mm.
this new condition, misophonia, and people who one of the highest triggers is happens to be people who are sitting down making strange noises.
That would have been amazing. I,
Yeah.
I absolutely should have done that. What a missed opportunity.
But semi seriously, it would be interesting. Because yeah, these psychology classes have tons of students, and I think that's a perfect opportunity to you know, when it makes sense to kind of maybe bring up misophonia. At least you have
Right.
people around you who might, even if they don't give a crap, like at least it's in their head now, like that term,
Yes.
and
Yeah.
might be a kind of a free way to raise awareness
Mm.
with a captive audience who may or may not be awake, but at that time, but um,
Yeah. Yeah, I
Interesting. So,
remember. Yeah, I
yeah.
did. I did bring up the smell thing in that class, and
Ah,
everyone was
yeah.
pretty interested in that.
So, are you able to taste as well? Because I know that those two senses are linked.
Yeah, they
Okay.
are very closely intertwined. So I would say I've heard the term like flavor versus taste used before, where flavor is
Mm,
the combination, this like combined experience in your brain of the taste on your tongue and the smell that you're smelling. So I don't have that experience, I guess. Those like
okay.
really rich complexities and
Right.
distinctions between like two kinds of pear or whatever. Like I can't taste that. But like for example, when they have flavored lollipops or flavored soda, I'm like,
Yeah.
I kind of don't believe it. I'm like, no, you're lying if you're telling me you can taste the difference between those two things. Like, there's no difference.
Yeah.
um,
Gotcha.
yeah, that's one of
Cool.
the questions. Classic question. I usually get either when I was a kid, I used to get, so can you breathe through your nose?
Oh.
Which was strange because nothing to do with my nose.
Yeah. Yeah.
The other question is usually, yeah, can you taste?
The whole taste. Yeah. 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 I don't have any other interesting questions about that. So I had to ask the obvious. Were you so you haven't mentioned to your it's funny to your much to your friends. I'm curious if you brought it up maybe at school with teachers and gotten
Hmm.
any kind of like accommodations.
Oh, that would have been an excellent idea. Um, no, I guess I now that I'm talking with you, kind of I'm realizing how much I've just sort of taken the burden on myself to like
Mhm.
deal with it myself and like not inconvenience anybody else at any cost, which is probably not the healthiest way to deal with it.
Well, many of us do that, especially like before
Yeah,
we even knew what it was. And honestly, I
right.
mean, if you are able to get through it, sounds like you are. These are good skills you're building up for real life, for adult life,
Right.
when you won't always have that opportunity to get accommodations somewhere.
Yeah. I know a lot of people. My college does very well with accommodations compared to some institutions, but
Hmm.
I also know a lot of people who um, it has not been a great experience. Like for people who might need extra time on assignments or things like that.
Oh,
Sometimes professors will just tell you too bad. Like I know you have an accommodation, but like too bad, which is not how that's supposed to work.
yeah,
Um,
right,
not helpful.
right.
Um, sometimes accommodations, even in college, which is supposed to be like this little bubble where everyone takes care of you. Sometimes that doesn't even work there, which is unfortunate. But maybe that was part of why I didn't go that route because um, I don't necessarily have a lot of faith in that system. Although
Right.
talking
Well,
into individual teachers is usually a really good strategy, even just about anything.
yeah. No, I
Taking
mean,
individual
you're right.
beats.
No, I think that's a healthy approach. Just not have 100%. I mean, to be open, if people will accommodate, that's great, but not to rely on that.
Hmm.
Is good because yeah, that's not always going to be the case. That people will be nice and accommodate. So
Right. But I guess
we need
you
to trudge
they
through.
definitely won't accommodate you if you don't ask or
Right.
explain the
Right.
situation. So there's
Yeah.
also that.
Right. Yeah, so maybe let's we've talked about your experience here at college. You want to go back to kind of maybe like way back to like early time
Yeah.
early days for you. Like how did this all kind of like come up for you?
Yeah. I remember it happened pretty suddenly that I started noticing eating sounds at all. I remember every year my family goes to visit my grandparents, and it was about in the summer. It was about halfway in between two of those summer vacations when I started noticing when we were eating as a family together, like at the dinner table, um, how much it bothered me that I had never bothered me before,
Mm,
and it was really quickly like a big. That was one of the major stressors in my relationship with my family at that point and for many years after that because none of us understood what was going on. And this was at a time when I was kind of like just entering like my angsty tween kind of like stage where I was making trouble for picking fights with my parents, whatever, for other reasons that were
Yeah.
maybe less valid. So then when I was kind of like acting angry at the dinner table and I didn't understand why and they didn't understand why, um, they just thought I was, I don't know, like being rude for the sake of it or something.
Yeah.
That was
Very
hard.
common.
So
Yeah.
yeah. And then I remember it was just like when this all started, it was just like a month or two until we were going to go on our vacation to visit my grandparents. And I was thinking of it like I was so looking forward to it because, then I'd be able to. I figured like then I'd be able to be with people who maybe weren't as noisy when they were eating because I figured maybe my family is just really noisy eaters.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and like I would try and explain to them sometimes like you're being so loud, you're making all these sounds and the sounds are so gross, and they would be like we're not making any sounds, and I would be like you are, and then they would like I would think I was crazy and I'd think they were crazy and they would think I was just being like rude. So
Yeah.
that wasn't working out well. So I was like maybe when I see my grandparents it'll be a little sanity check and they'll like understand and they'll be like oh yeah your mom
I
is a
think I
little
know where this
loud
is
but
going.
whatever. Yeah, unfortunately, so we got there and I was so excited. And we sat down to eat lunch together when we arrived, and both my grandparents, love my grandparents so much, but they are the loudest eaters I have ever met. So loud, so much lip smacking, so
Yeah.
just moist noises. I was like in hell. And I just remember this like sinking feeling of horror, like, oh my God, I'm never going to escape this. Um, yeah, so and that's been a problem with my grandparents a lot where like although my parents and my sibling have kind of gotten to understand um, what's going on with me, I think my grandparents still don't really understand, and that's sometimes I'll like have to leave
Mm-hmm.
in the middle of the meal when I finish and like go downstairs for a few minutes and then come back up when people are done eating, and I think they take it a little personally, but like I feel like no matter how many times I try to explain, because there's this whole history when I was a kid of like all these arguments between us and all these negative associations, it's like hard to undo that. Whereas like with new people who didn't see it when it was starting and when I was so confused about it, when everyone was getting into so many arguments about it. With new people that I meet now, it's possible for me to have much healthier interactions around it,
Yeah,
and for me to kind
you can
of
frame
frame
it
it.
up front. Yeah.
Yeah, and then they don't already have all these resentments toward me for like me being rude to them in the past or whatever. But with my family, I think it's kind of too late for that. We still have a lot of arguments about it sometimes, and
And that's
that's
with your nuclear family too, or your
yeah,
grandparents. Yeah.
yeah,
Okay.
especially with my grandparents, but also with my nuclear family. Um, just because it was like every day at dinner we would get into a fight, you know. um,
Yeah.
so
And was it, did you just have to stay at the table at that point, like not knowing anything
I
and kind of argue about
yeah,
it?
I would
Or,
try, and then I remember I would in my mind somewhere subconsciously I must have been trying to find an escape route because I would like have to go use the bathroom. Like when we would be at the dinner table, I would
yeah,
like suddenly really have to go use the
your
bathroom, and then I would be
bladder
able
would
to like
save the
run
day.
into yeah, exactly. I would like run out and be like, I'm going over here. And my parents would be like, okay, this is weird. I remember pretty early on, my mom actually took me to the doctor, and she mentioned it to the doctor. She was like, I'm worried because Keara is like this thing is happening and I don't understand, and she's like always upset at dinner, and she's like then she is always having to use the bathroom during dinner. Like I don't understand, something is wrong, and the doctor didn't know it was wrong either. So that was could have been an opportunity for us to learn about misophonia, but unfortunately it wasn't. Um, so there were several more years where we were just trying and failing to sort of like um, figure out what was going on and why all this tension was happening. There was actually an app that was sort of like a science fun facts for kids app that was sort of interactive, that was all about like the senses and like sensory
Hmm.
illusions and stuff like that, like that those tones that are like that sound like they're always going down forever and ever and ever. I don't know if you've heard that one before. I forget what it's called,
Maybe
but
not that's, oh, Was it a general like a science education app, or was it
Yeah, kind of like a
okay?
yeah.
Yeah.
And so that was one of the things they were talking. I remember really distinctly where I was like sitting in my room on this app, like going through all the little demonstrations, and one of them is where like there's a bunch of notes in a scale, and then all the notes go down at once, and then like slowly they put the same note back up at the top, but it sounds like it's really do 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 forever, all the way down. Anyway, that was an interesting one. Then the next one was they were telling you what misophonia is, and the next little
Whoa.
interactive thing in this app was like the sound of someone chewing gum really loudly, and I was like and then
Yeah.
like I hit next, and then it was like, did that bother you? And I was like, yes, that bothered me so much. And they were like, you have misophonia, and I was like, oh my god.
Oh,
um,
I have not heard of this. I've not heard of someone
yeah,
finding it out through an app. Do you remember the name of this?
I wish I remembered the name of it.
Okay. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
I can
I'll
try
Google
and
for it
look it up,
after.
but
Yeah,
yeah,
interesting.
this was
Obviously, a light bulb
that
went
was
on
big.
over your head. Yeah.
Yeah, so I definitely that was the moment when it like clicked. That I was like, oh,
Yeah.
I'm not
So,
crazy. Like this is a thing. And then I like talked to
yeah.
my parents about it, and they're like, oh, that makes so much sense.
Yeah.
um, so that
And
was
did that
helpful.
help? Yeah, obviously.
Yes,
Is that when they got these psychologist appointments?
that was
Or
a couple years later again when I
yeah.
was. This was probably when I was in elementary school still, or like
Hmm.
early middle school, that I saw
Hmm.
that on the app. And I think there was a little bit of like mutual apology that happened. Like, I'm sorry we
Ah,
like didn't believe you before, like, because I guess they thought I was making it up until that moment when they were like, oh, this is like other people have this too, which is a little frustrating for me that they like didn't trust me to like it wasn't valid until like some like science person told them it was valid. Like,
right.
why were my feelings not valid until then? But anyway, that's fine. I understand. I was like a kind of annoying little kid, whatever. But that was interesting. But it did help
Yeah.
because then we kind of had this moment of like a little bit of mending and more mutual understanding after that, because we
Right. So that's
had
where
this sort of outside context to understand what was going on.
Yeah, so that's where it always gets a little interesting because you get that little, I call it the honeymoon period, but I'm assuming in the ensuing years, it's not like a magic pill. It's
No,
now it's like you both know, like everyone knows about it, but you're still getting triggered. Um,
exactly. And we still fall into the same patterns where like I think I don't even realize, when I start sort of looking grumpy, I don't even realize I'm looking grumpy. I think I'm
yeah,
doing great. And then my family is so attuned to those little cues, like just as attuned as I am to those little sounds that they make. They're so
yeah,
attuned, even subconsciously, to like knowing when I'm getting annoyed. Then they'll start getting defensive, and then I'll get more upset, and then we'll both get upset at each other. It's like even though we all
okay,
understand
yeah.
exactly what's going on now, it's those patterns are just in there in this like dynamic. So it's really
Do you
hard to
think
fix.
that's right? Do you think it's part of that because of that the baggage coming in because it was not
Yeah,
framed up front? Yeah, yeah,
yeah, definitely, yeah. So that's too bad. That's like
yeah.
probably one of the more, um, probably one of the biggest sources of like if I still have arguments with my family, that's usually what it is.
What it's about. Do you feel like
Yeah,
it's caused like a general rift, like a distance maybe between you and your parents, or is it just kind of that is like a
um,
that's a topic that is kind of isolated, but it causes a lot of stress. But otherwise,
yeah. I would
you
say
guys are close.
I think yeah, we're definitely we have me and my parents and my sibling and my
Hmm.
grandparents. We all have a really close relationship, and I think
Hmm. Hmm.
it's definitely something that like has caused a lot of hurt. But I think it's not that it was nothing, but I think it's also something that hasn't. Um, it has affected our relationship and our dynamic, but not to the point where like we aren't as close as we could be or anything. It's definitely like
Gotcha.
an unfortunate thing, but I think
Yeah.
luckily we have much more like positive memories and positive connections than we have that. It's
Yeah.
more positive than that positive outweighs the negative, I would say,
Yeah. Yeah. That's
which is
great.
good.
That's great. And what about our friends around that time? Were you, because when you were in
Mm,
elementary, junior high, high school, how did, obviously you did well in school because you made it to where you are now,
thank
but
you. Yeah.
did it, yeah, like how did you, were you getting triggered at school? Some people were not. I mean, some people have talked
Mm.
to, it was really just at home. I'm just curious how things were socially for you.
Yeah, I remember. I don't remember being triggered at school or with friends. I remember mostly at home, and I think part of it is because of how much time I spent at home versus how much time I
Hmm.
would spend with any individual friend. Um, yeah, I don't. I'm trying to remember like a specific time uh, when I would be triggered by something like eating meals with friends, but I don't think so. Um,
Yeah, that's not
which is,
uncommon,
yeah, kind of
thankfully.
interesting.
Otherwise, yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
thank God.
Yeah, interesting. Yeah, okay, so socially it didn't really affect you so much. So what about so okay, so you said you're kind of a senior. You're looking at ahead at getting going into the workforce. Have you done internships like been in an office environment before?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. So, and that's been fine. I, I haven't, I don't think, I mean, I'm sure I've been slightly annoyed by things here and there, but for
Yeah.
the most part, I mean, working in an office, uh, I probably have my headphones near me so I can,
Yeah.
or I have my own office sometimes.
Right, I was
And
gonna
if not,
ask like what
yeah.
was like open office or closed or
Yeah. There was one internship I had where me and another intern had an office together, and she liked to go eat outside, so that was fine. She liked to go sit in the sunshine and eat, so that was perfect for me. Um, and then the other internship I had was, yeah, an open office plan, but there was also like a nice kitchen area with a view, and so I think most people congregated in the kitchen area. So I could
yeah.
kind of I could control that a little more and decide like, um, I'm gonna decide to venture into the kitchen and have a social meal, or like today I'm feeling a little on edge, I'm not going to do that, you know.
Yeah, no, hold on to that freedom. Yeah, because I personally don't like to have group lunches and stuff, but
Mm-hmm.
it's good to yeah, it's good to have that freedom. And also yeah, that's kind of the one of the good things about yeah, getting into adulthood is that you do have more control over your environment, like where you live. You're not going to be with a roommate for the rest of your life,
Mm-hmm.
and also where you're working, you'll be able to just take lunch out whenever you want and wherever you want. So that should be good.
Yeah. Yes.
Have you noticed kind of on that point? Well, another thing people mention is that as they're getting older, there more things are starting to trigger them. Like you said, obviously eating noises are big for you, as they are for me and a lot of people. But have you noticed like the types of triggers start to widen?
Yeah, that's a really interesting question. I a little bit. Yeah,
Hmm.
I'm trying to think of. So I know some people like it bothers them with pens tapping or something, but it doesn't
Right.
usually bother me. Although like every once in a while, I've had little sounds like that start to bother me. But I haven't noticed like any like regularly over time thing more and more
Yeah.
things. So that's good, I guess. um,
What about the visuals? Like, is that
hmm,
I don't think we mentioned that yet, but are
right.
you do you get triggered by visuals now, kind of before a sound, or even if you don't hear it?
Yeah, definitely a little bit. Yeah, like if I can see someone eating, especially if I've heard them just then and then I like put on headphones or something, if I can still
Ah,
see them, I have to like turn away or like cover
yeah,
my eyes.
right,
Um,
right,
yeah, definitely. Although I would say that's less intense than um, the sound triggers,
right.
which
Yeah,
is too
yeah,
bad
yeah.
because it's kind of easier to control whether you're seeing something than whether you're hearing something. But
Right.
mm,
Oh, and also, have you, I talked to Natalie, who's at UCLA, and she actually started a group, student
oh,
group for misophonia. It sounds like you probably, it sounds like you haven't met anybody else who has misophonia, at least at school,
I
or
think
maybe you have, or
I think I've met one person who
oh,
has it,
excellent, yeah,
who is a friend of mine who uh, crinkling bags is the one thing that they like can't they can't listen to. And I feel bad because I totally know that experience, and then I always like forget and I crinkle a bag near them and they like flinch and I'm like, I am so sorry.
Yeah. But you haven't mentioned
doing the
this funny with
exact same
them?
thing. I feel like we might have talked about it after we were playing D&D together. We were in a D&D campaign. And one of the other people who was playing had this, little bag of chips from the vending machine and was, opening it, crinkling it, and like every time they would eat something. So we were probably both actually pretty annoyed by that for different reasons. And I remember kind of like looking at them because this was actually, I think maybe the second time that this had happened, where like the first time they had eventually said like, could you not crinkle that bag? And the other person was like, oh, sorry. And then stopped crinkling it. And then like they forgot. And like the next week they had a bag again. And I remember me and my friend, like silent connection across the table. We like had this little look. We were like, oh my God. And so they were actually eating fairly quietly, so I wasn't too bothered, but I like could see it in their face. Like they were just, because they had already asked the person and then the person didn't do it. And this is a very polite, like Minnesotan. So I knew they weren't going to say anything. So I said to the person, can I get you a paper towel to put your chips on so you don't have to get them out of the bag? And they were like, oh, sure. And then after, my friend was like, thank you. Like, you have saved me.
Yeah.
So we have a little alliance, which is nice.
Interesting. Yeah, cool. Yeah, because I was curious if you'd met anybody or had thought about maybe starting a student group. It'd be great to see one of these like at every school and just kind of get all these people who probably don't. Your friend probably has no idea that it's a real thing. Kind of like where you were 10 years ago or so. So
yeah, and that would actually be really helpful. Just because I'm sure that I do know other people, and I just we haven't had any reason to talk about it, so I don't know.
Yeah. Well, we're coming up to close to the top of the hour. Is there is there anything you want to mention to people maybe who are also in school or otherwise about miso, what you've learned or your experience?
I would definitely just say, don't be afraid of talking about it. Especially for people who are coming into college, there's a lot of stress sometimes around.
All right.
Are people going to like me? How am I going to find friends? Like, and I've been very lucky to be at a college where there's a lot of diversity and people really value people from different experiences already. But I would say, as long as you're being honest and you're being polite, then other people are going to notice that and like give that back to you. So that would be my biggest piece of advice to give, or just words of encouragement, I think.
Yeah, no, that's great. That's important. And as we mentioned before, the sooner you can talk about it and frame a friendship and get it out in the open, the less weird baggage you'll have before you inevitably do have to talk about it.
Exactly.
So it's key. Cool. Well, yeah. Thanks again for reaching out, and this was really interesting. It's good to get to know. Hopefully, after pandemic, we can kind of get a little group going in St. Paul.
That would be great. That would be awesome. Yeah. Oh my God, there's so many things to do after the pandemic is over.
Absolutely.
That'd be nice.
Thank you, Keara. Great way to kick off the new season. If you're enjoying the shows, don't forget to leave a little review. Give us a follow and join the conversation on Instagram or Facebook at Misophonia Podcast, or Twitter at Misophonia Show. Music, as always, is by Moby, and until next week, wishing you peace and quiet.